It was a busy afternoon at the high-end retail store on Oak Street, a place known for its designer clothes and luxury items. Shiny glass windows displayed beautiful dresses and expensive shoes that caught the eye of every passerby. Inside, the store was calm, with a few customers browsing quietly, making the occasional comment about the items they were looking at. The lighting was soft, casting a warm glow on everything in the store, but today, there was an unusual tension in the air. A young boy, about 16 years old, walked into the store. His name was Marcus, a teenager who had visited the shop a few times before. He was dressed casually in a hoodie and jeans, his sneakers a little worn from constant use, but he walked with confidence. He was like any other teen, just trying to look for a jacket to keep warm in the upcoming winter months. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. However, Linda, the store manager, was watching him with suspicion from the moment he walked through the door. She had been managing this store for over 5 years and thought she knew exactly how to read people. She prided herself on being sharp, noticing small details that others might miss. But today, something about Marcus made her uneasy. She couldn't explain why, but she couldn't shake the feeling that he didn't belong in her store. Her eyes followed him as he wandered around, picking up a jacket and then putting it back. He seemed more interested in looking around than actually making a purchase. Linda's suspicion grew as he started to look at the more expensive items on display. She didn't know if it was the way he moved or just the look in his eyes, but she began to think that Marcus might be up to something. Maybe he was planning to steal something. She knew it wasn't right to judge him, but Linda couldn't help herself. She had seen people in the past walk into her store, looking innocent, only to leave with stolen goods. She had to make sure that wouldn't happen again. She moved quietly toward the back of the store to call for backup. At the counter, the cashier, Sarah, noticed Linda's nervous movements and the way her eyes were locked on Marcus. She could feel the tension in the air. She had worked with Linda for a while and had never seen her act like this. Sarah had a feeling something wasn't right, but she kept her head down, continuing with her work. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to browse, completely unaware of Linda's watchful gaze. He checked his phone for a moment, feeling the slight embarrassment of being watched. But he shrugged it off. He'd been in stores before and never had a problem. But today, he felt like something was different, like he was being watched more closely than usual. When Marcus made his way toward the exit, still without a purchase, Linda acted quickly. She pulled out her phone and made a call to the local police. Her voice was calm but firm as she explained the situation. "I think a customer may be trying to steal something," she said, her words precise. "He's been acting suspicious, looking around too much, and now he's heading for the door." Her voice trembled slightly, but she was sure of her decision. Linda didn't hesitate to hang up after giving the necessary details. She watched as Marcus approached the door, glancing back at the store. For a moment, their eyes met, but Marcus didn't say anything. He didn't even seem to notice her staring. With a quick step, he pushed the door open and left. Outside, Marcus paused for a moment, feeling a mix of confusion and discomfort. Why was it that every time he walked into stores like these, he always felt like people were watching him more closely than they did others? He shook the feeling off, thinking it was just his imagination. But when he stepped out of the store, he didn't realize that Linda had already called the police. Minutes later, 2 officers arrived at the scene. They were professional and calm, quickly moving to question Marcus. He explained that he hadn't done anything wrong and was just looking at the clothes. But the officers didn't seem to listen much. They kept asking him questions, wanting to know why he had been in the store and whether he had taken anything. Marcus was shocked. He hadn't taken anything. He wasn't a thief. But here he was, standing on the sidewalk, being questioned like a criminal. He felt small and powerless. He didn't want to make a scene, but he couldn't understand why this was happening. He had walked into the store so many times before. Why was today different? Was it because of his clothes? His skin color? The officers didn't make things any easier. They seemed more interested in the call from the store manager than in listening to him. Marcus stood there for what felt like hours, trying to explain, but the more he spoke, the more he felt like his words were falling on deaf ears. Inside the store, Linda stood by the window, watching. She felt justified in what she had done. She had seen people steal before, and she wasn't about to let it happen again. But deep down, a part of her felt uneasy. She had never called the police on anyone before, but this time, something just didn't feel right. As Marcus stood outside, still being questioned by the officers, he looked up and saw a car pull up in front of the store. It was a black luxury sedan, the kind that turned heads. A tall, well-dressed man stepped out of the car, looking calm but concerned. It was Richard Harris, the CEO of the store chain. He was the kind of person everyone in the company respected, and his presence in the middle of this situation made Marcus pause. Richard was known for being kind and always trying to do the right thing. He had built his company from the ground up, and everyone admired him for his integrity. But Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Richard might not understand what was happening. He didn't know why, but something told him that this was about to become a lot more complicated than just a simple misunderstanding. As Richard walked toward the store, his eyes quickly scanned the situation. He noticed his daughter, Linda, standing by the door, looking worried. He didn't know what was going on, but the moment he saw the police and Marcus standing there, something didn't sit right. He had no idea how this would turn out, but he knew one thing: this wasn't the way he wanted his company to be represented. As Richard stepped out of the black sedan, the cool autumn breeze brushed against his suit, making him feel more alert. His sharp eyes took in the scene in front of him, two police officers talking to Marcus, who was standing awkwardly on the sidewalk. Linda was near the store door, looking uncomfortable. The tension was palpable, and Richard could sense that something wasn't right. He had been in many high-pressure situations before, but this felt different. His heart began to race slightly, unsure of what he was about to walk into. Richard was a well-respected CEO, known not only for his business acumen but also for his dedication to integrity and fairness. His company was a reflection of his values he had always tried to instill in his family and employees. But today, as he looked at the police officers questioning the young boy, he felt a knot form in his stomach. He didn't know Marcus, but from the way things were unfolding, it didn't look like this was a situation that should have gone this far. He quickly made his way toward the group. Marcus, feeling the weight of the officers' stares, was clearly uncomfortable, shifting from foot to foot. The officers weren't being aggressive, but their questioning was persistent, and Marcus was starting to feel like he was being treated as a criminal when he hadn't done anything wrong. Linda, standing off to the side, kept her gaze locked on Marcus. She felt a mixture of guilt and defense. She knew she had acted on suspicion, but she also felt justified. She had a responsibility to protect the store, to keep things under control. She had seen people act suspiciously in the past, and in her mind, this was no different. But as her father approached, she began to question herself. She wasn't used to seeing him involved in situations like this, and the discomfort in her chest grew stronger. Richard walked up to Linda, giving her a questioning look. "What's going on here?" he asked, his voice calm but carrying an authority that made Linda feel uneasy. She hesitated, unsure of how to explain the situation to her father. She knew he expected her to make the right call, to follow the rules, but now, standing here, she was beginning to question whether she had done the right thing. "This kid," Linda began, gesturing toward Marcus, "was acting suspicious. He was in the store for a while, didn't seem like he was looking to buy anything. And then when he started to leave, I just felt something was off." Her voice wavered slightly, and she glanced over at Marcus. So, I called the police. Richard listened quietly, but his face showed a growing concern. He glanced over at the officers, who were still speaking with Marcus, and then back to his daughter. He knew Linda well. He knew she wasn't one to make rash decisions, but this situation didn't feel right. He took a deep breath and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Linda," Richard said gently, "you have to be careful with these things. We don't want to create a situation where a simple misunderstanding turns into something much bigger. Did you speak to him at all? Did you ask if he needed help?" Linda's eyes dropped to the ground. She hadn't thought to speak to Marcus directly. She had just reacted out of suspicion, without considering that there could be another explanation. "No," she admitted softly. "I didn't. I thought I saw something." Richard nodded slowly. "I understand, but it's important to approach situations like this with caution. We don't want to make someone feel like they're being accused when they haven't done anything wrong. Let me go talk to him." Richard walked toward Marcus, who had been standing quietly, looking down at the ground. The police officers seemed to be done asking questions, but they were still there, unsure of how to proceed. Marcus lifted his head as Richard approached, his eyes filled with confusion and uncertainty. He didn't know who this man was, but he could tell from the way the officers were standing that this wasn't just some regular store visit. Something was wrong. "Hey, are you okay?" Richard asked, his voice kind but firm. Marcus nodded, though it was clear that he was shaken. "I didn't do anything wrong," he said softly. "I just came to look at the jackets." Richard gave him a reassuring smile. "I believe you," he said. He turned to the officers. "Is there a reason you're questioning this young man?" The officers looked at each other, unsure of how to respond. They hadn't actually seen Marcus do anything wrong. They were just following up on a call from the store. "Well, sir," one of the officers said hesitantly, "we were just checking things out because the store manager felt there was some suspicious behavior." Richard's eyebrows furrowed slightly. He looked back at Linda, who was standing near the door, her face now full of regret. He walked back toward her, calling her over. As she approached, she lowered her eyes, avoiding his gaze. "Linda," Richard said, his voice calm but carrying a weight of disappointment, "this isn't the way we handle things. We don't call the police just because we feel uncomfortable. We need to have better judgment and empathy in situations like this. I want you to go over to Marcus, apologize, and make it right." Linda felt her heart drop. She had always respected her father's opinions, but hearing him speak to her like this made her realize just how much she had gotten wrong. She was a store manager, yes, but she was also his daughter, and she had let him down. She nodded slowly, feeling ashamed. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Marcus as she walked toward him. Her voice was shaky, and she couldn't meet his eyes at first. "I shouldn't have called the police. I was wrong." Marcus looked up at her, surprised. "It's okay," he said, though his voice still held a hint of distrust. "I just don't understand why this happened." Linda took a deep breath, trying to calm herself. "I acted out of fear, and I let that control me. It wasn't right, and I apologize for making you feel like you were a threat when you weren't." The apology was enough to break the tension in the air, but the damage had already been done. Richard watched his daughter and Marcus interact, his thoughts racing. He knew this wasn't just about a single incident. It was about something much deeper, something that had to change. "Thank you for accepting my apology," Linda said quietly, still standing in front of Marcus. "I've learned a hard lesson today." Richard nodded, his mind already working on the next steps. He knew that this moment needed to be used as a turning point, not just for Linda, but for the entire store. "This isn't over," he said to both of them. "We need to do better, and we will. As Marcus stood there, hearing those words, he felt a sense of relief. Maybe this wasn't just an incident he would have to carry around. Maybe something good could come out of it after all. The days following the incident were heavy for everyone involved. Linda spent hours reflecting on what had happened and how quickly things had spiraled out of control. She had always been proud of her role as the manager of the store, but now, she felt a deep sense of regret. She knew that her actions had been driven by fear and bias, and the thought of having possibly ruined an innocent teenager's day weighed heavily on her heart. Richard, her father, had always been her guiding figure, teaching her the values of fairness and integrity. But his disappointment, though calm, had been hard for her to handle. She knew that her father would never let this go until she had learned from it. The more she thought about the situation, the more she realized that it was a bigger issue than just her mistake. It was about the culture of the store, the assumptions people made, and how easy it was to fall into prejudices without even thinking about it. Marcus, on the other hand, had returned to his life after the incident, but it had left an impact on him. He had always been careful, always aware of the way he was perceived by others, but that day had made him even more cautious. As a young black teenager, he was no stranger to being watched and judged, but this experience was different. It wasn't just the suspicion of one person, it was the power of the system, the authority figures, and the way they all had the ability to act based on assumptions. Even when he had done nothing wrong, the actions of others had made him feel small, like he was someone to be feared, even though he didn't deserve it. His parents were understandably upset when they heard what had happened. They had taught Marcus to be respectful, to always stay calm, and to trust that things would work out. But the world wasn't always kind to people who looked like him. His mother had been particularly worried about what might have happened if the situation had escalated further. She didn't want her son to grow up in a world where he was always viewed with suspicion simply because of the color of his skin. Richard, who had been watching everything from a distance, wasn't one to let things go easily. He knew that this incident needed more than just a quiet apology. It required action. It required him to lead by example, to make sure that this moment turned into something that would affect real change. So, the very next morning, he called a meeting with the store's senior staff. Linda, still feeling the sting of the previous days, knew that this meeting would be a turning point for her. She didn't know what Richard had planned, but she knew it would be a chance for her to make things right. At the meeting, Richard opened by acknowledging the situation that had unfolded. His voice was firm, but his tone was empathetic. He didn't focus solely on Linda's mistake. Instead, he turned the attention to the bigger picture, the company's values and the responsibility they all shared. He reminded everyone that the store wasn't just about selling high-end merchandise, it was about creating an environment where every customer felt valued and respected. "We are not just a store," Richard said, looking around the room at the gathered staff. "We are a reflection of the world we live in. And if we want to be a place where people come and feel safe, we need to be aware of how we treat others. We need to check our assumptions, challenge our biases, and never forget that we're all human. Every person who walks through that door should feel welcome, no matter who they are." Linda sat quietly in the back of the room, absorbing her father's words. She had always been proud of the work they did at the store, but she realized that she had missed something important in her pursuit of maintaining order. She had been so focused on security and efficiency that she had forgotten about the emotional side of the work. She had made a decision based on fear, and that fear had affected the young boy's life. It wasn't just an incident, it was a moment that needed to be corrected, not just with an apology, but with real action. Richard turned to Linda, who was sitting across the room, her hands folded in her lap. "Linda, I want you to lead the change," he said, his voice steady but filled with purpose. "You have the ability to make a difference. But it starts with you. You need to understand why this happened, and how we can do better. This store, this company, can be a place that leads by example. But you need to make sure that we create a culture where this doesn't happen again. Linda's eyes met her father's, and for the first time in a long time, she felt a surge of both fear and determination. She wasn't sure what her father had in mind, but she knew that he believed in her, even if she had let him down. This was her chance to prove to him and to herself that she could turn this mistake into something meaningful. As the meeting continued, Richard laid out a plan to address the situation. The store would implement mandatory bias and diversity training for all employees. This would include not only Linda and her team but also the senior management, and even the higher UPS in the corporate office. It would be a comprehensive approach to tackling the assumptions and biases that could affect the way employees interacted with customers. It was important, Richard said, to make sure that every person who worked at the store understood the responsibility they had in creating an inclusive, welcoming environment. Linda agreed to lead the training sessions herself, not just as the store manager, but as someone who had learned from her mistake. She knew that this was her opportunity to grow and help others do the same. She would be the one to set the tone for the entire store. She would make sure that every employee understood that it was their duty to challenge their own assumptions and learn how to treat people with the dignity and respect they deserved. Meanwhile, Marcus's family had been discussing what had happened as well. Marcus's mother, though still upset, appreciated Richard's actions. She was glad that the CEO was taking responsibility and that steps were being taken to make sure that no one else would experience the same kind of treatment. But she also knew that this wasn't just about one store or one incident. It was part of a larger conversation about how people of color were treated in public spaces. She wanted to make sure that Marcus didn't carry this burden alone. She wanted him to know that this was a problem that needed to be addressed on a larger scale, not just within the walls of one store. The changes in the store came slowly, but they were steady. Linda worked tirelessly to ensure that the new training programs were implemented. She worked with diversity experts to create courses that would challenge employees to think deeply about their biases and how those biases affected their interactions with others. She wanted to create a space where people could be honest about their fears and misconceptions, and where they could learn how to move past them. The first training session was difficult. There were uncomfortable moments, when people had to confront their own prejudices and biases. But by the end of it, Linda felt a sense of relief. She could see the change in the room. People were talking openly about their experiences and acknowledging the things they had learned. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Linda felt a sense of hope for the first time since the incident with Marcus. She knew that this wouldn't be the last step, but it was the first. And for Marcus, though his life had returned to normal, he could sense a shift in the way people treated him. The world hadn't magically changed overnight, but he felt a little less invisible. He had learned that his voice mattered, that he didn't have to accept the assumptions others made about him. He was no longer just a bystander in his own life, he was part of a bigger conversation, one that he hoped would lead to real change. Linda continued to lead with purpose, determined to make sure that the store not only became a place of business but a place of learning, growth, and respect. It was a journey for everyone involved, but it was a journey that they were all committed to taking together. Weeks passed, and the changes in the store began to take shape. Linda's hard work on the new diversity and inclusion programs started to show results. The employees were taking the training seriously, and there was a noticeable shift in the atmosphere of the store. What had once been a space where customers were often treated with a mix of indifference or suspicion was now becoming a place where people felt welcome, valued, and respected. Linda was determined to lead by example, but she knew that true change would take time. She regularly checked in with her staff, making sure that the lessons from the training were being applied in real-world situations. It wasn't always easy. There were times when old habits would resurface, and Linda would have to step in and gently remind her team of the importance of being open-minded and empathetic. The store's regular customers started to notice the change, too. At first, they couldn't quite put their finger on what was different, but something felt better. The staff was more attentive, but in a way that didn't feel forced. The atmosphere was warmer, more inviting, and people seemed more comfortable in the space. The store had always been about luxury, but now it was about more than just selling expensive products. It was about creating a community. The people who walked in felt like they belonged, no matter who they were. Meanwhile, Marcus was still processing everything that had happened. The apology from Linda had been a good start, but he knew that it wasn't enough to erase the sting of being falsely accused. The experience had shaken him, but it had also given him a sense of purpose. He wanted to make sure that the next time something like this happened, it didn't go unnoticed. His parents had always taught him to stand up for what was right, and they had shown him how to channel his anger into positive action. Marcus wasn't the type to hold grudges, but he knew that he couldn't just let this pass by without speaking out. He began to get involved with local community groups that focused on racial equality and justice. He wasn't alone in his efforts. There were many people in his community who shared his desire for change. Together, they started raising awareness about how incidents like the one at the store happened far too often and how it needed to stop. One evening, Marcus sat down with his mother and father after a long day of meetings with the group. "I don't know if what I'm doing is going to make a big difference, but I'm doing something," he said, his voice filled with determination. His mother smiled softly, reaching out to place a hand on his. "You are making a difference, Marcus. Sometimes, the smallest steps lead to the biggest changes. Just keep speaking up, keep doing what's right." His father nodded in agreement. "We're proud of you, son. Just remember, it's not about winning or losing, it's about making sure our voices are heard." The conversations around Marcus were shifting. No longer was he just the boy who had been accused wrongly. Now, he was someone who was actively working to make sure that people in his community wouldn't have to go through what he had. His sense of purpose had grown, and with each meeting, each discussion, he felt more empowered to create a world where racial profiling and discrimination didn't have a place. Back at the store, Linda was still putting in the effort. After each training session, she had a moment of clarity where she realized just how important this work was, not just for her store, but for her as a person. She couldn't go back to the way things were. The lessons she had learned from Marcus and from the training had changed her forever. She had always thought of herself as someone who did her best to be fair, but the truth was that she had been blind to the subtle ways in which bias had shaped her actions. Now, she understood that real fairness required constant effort and awareness. It wasn't something that could be taken for granted. Richard was proud of how his daughter had handled everything. She had stepped up and done the work to make sure that the store became a more inclusive place. But he also knew that the work was never really done. It was an ongoing process, and the store had to continue to evolve to keep up with the times. It wasn't just about creating a welcoming environment for customers, it was about making sure that every employee felt seen, heard, and valued. Richard had been a quiet but firm presence in the background, offering guidance when needed. He had always been a leader, but he was also willing to admit when something wasn't right and needed to change. Watching Linda grow into a more thoughtful and empathetic manager had made him even more proud of her. He knew that she was ready for the challenge ahead. Together, they made sure that the store's new policies were not only followed, but that they became a part of the store's identity. Then, one afternoon, Linda received a message from Marcus. It had been a few months since the incident, and she hadn't heard from him since their brief apology. She had often thought about reaching out to him to check in, but she wasn't sure if that would be welcomed. The message from Marcus, however, was a sign that he was open to further communication. "Hi, Linda," the message began. "I just wanted to let you know that I've seen the changes happening at the store. It's good to know that things are getting better. I appreciate the effort you and your father have put into making sure people are treated the way they should be. I know we didn't talk much after what happened, but I wanted to say thanks." Linda was taken aback for a moment. She had expected that Marcus would be angry with her for what she had done, but his message was filled with understanding. She couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for his words. She had expected the apology to be one-sided, but Marcus had shown her a level of grace that she didn't deserve. Linda took a deep breath and typed out her response. Marcus, I can't express how much your message means to me. I know I can't undo what happened, but I want you to know that I'm doing everything I can to make sure that it doesn't happen again. Thank you for giving us a chance to make things right. She sent the message, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. It wasn't just the apology that mattered, it was the fact that Marcus had allowed her to be part of his journey toward change. She hoped that, in some way, they could both continue to grow from the experience. The response came almost immediately. Thank you, Linda. I really appreciate you saying that. I think we can all learn from our mistakes if we're willing to listen and change. It's good to know that we're on the same side now. Linda sat back in her chair, a mix of emotions filling her. She knew that the road ahead wasn't easy. Change never was. But at that moment, she felt more hopeful than she had in weeks. She had made mistakes, but she had learned from them, and that's what mattered. Marcus had shown her that, even after difficult moments, there could be reconciliation and growth. And as she looked around her store, seeing employees engage with customers in a more thoughtful and inclusive way, Linda realized that this was just the beginning. The work wasn't done, but it had started. And for the first time in a long time, she believed that they were headed in the right direction. Marcus's journey, like hers, was still unfolding. But with each step forward, they both moved closer to a world where assumptions were challenged, where fairness was a priority, and where kindness could always be counted on. The store, once a place of tension and unease, had now become a symbol of hope, a place where people could feel seen and understood, no matter who they were. And in that moment, Linda knew that the change they had started would continue to ripple out, touching more lives and creating the kind of world they all hoped for. Months had passed since that fateful day when Marcus had walked into the store and had been treated with suspicion. Though the incident had left its mark on him, it had also led to a series of positive changes that not only impacted his life but also reshaped the entire store. Linda, having learned from her mistake, had worked hard to create a better environment, one that would ensure no other customer would feel as out of place as Marcus had. The store was different now, but so were the people who worked there. Linda had grown from the experience. She'd gone from being a store manager who focused only on sales and efficiency to someone who deeply understood the importance of creating a safe and inclusive environment. She no longer saw her role as just managing a team, she saw it as an opportunity to make a real difference in how people interacted with one another. She had always been proud of her work, but now, she took pride in the fact that the store was making a positive impact on the community. The store's staff had embraced the changes, and the training had opened many eyes to the unconscious biases they all carried. It wasn't just about avoiding bigoted behavior, it was about noticing the small, subtle ways that people could be excluded or made to feel unwelcome. With Linda at the helm, the staff had learned to check their assumptions, to challenge stereotypes, and to treat every customer with the same level of respect, no matter their background or appearance. Richard, Linda's father, had always been a strong leader, but he saw in her a new strength, one that came from humility and a willingness to learn. Richard had been proud of his daughter before, but now, he admired her even more. She had turned a mistake into an opportunity for growth, and in doing so, she had helped everyone around her grow as well. One day, Richard sat down with Linda in the office after a long day of meetings. "I'm really proud of what you've accomplished," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You've not only transformed the store but also yourself. You've made this place a beacon of change, and I couldn't be more proud." Linda smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Dad. Your guidance has meant everything to me. But it's not just about the store, it's about making sure that I'm always learning and growing." Richard nodded. That's what leadership is about: continuous learning. And I'm proud to see you leading in such an important way. As the weeks went on, the changes continued to show results. The store became a place where people of all walks of life felt welcome. Customers who had once hesitated to enter because of the unspoken judgment they sensed now felt comfortable and appreciated. The team had become more than just co-workers. They had become a tight-knit group committed to ensuring that everyone who walked through their doors felt valued. Marcus, too, had started to feel more at ease. While the memory of what had happened still lingered, he had learned to channel his emotions into something positive. He had begun volunteering with local organizations that advocated for racial justice and equality, and he had even started speaking at events, sharing his story in the hopes of inspiring others to recognize and challenge their own biases. He had been invited to speak at a community meeting one evening, and as he stood before a small but engaged group, he felt a sense of purpose that he had never experienced before. He shared his story about the store and how the incident had impacted him, but he also spoke about the importance of change, of having the courage to challenge the status quo. It's not always easy, he said, but we all have a responsibility to make the world better for everyone. It starts with understanding and respect. The room was silent as Marcus finished speaking. He looked out at the faces in the crowd, many of whom were nodding in agreement. He felt a deep sense of pride in himself for speaking up, but he also felt a sense of connection with those who shared his vision for a better future. After the meeting, a woman approached him, her face filled with appreciation. "Your words really resonated with me," she said. "Thank you for sharing your story. It's people like you who are making the world a better place." Marcus smiled, humbled by her kind words. "Thank you. I'm just trying to do my part." Meanwhile, Linda and her team at the store had been taking their mission even further. They partnered with local schools to host workshops on diversity, inclusion, and unconscious bias. The store became a place not just for shopping, but for learning and growing together. Linda had also worked with the corporate office to ensure that similar training would be implemented across all locations. It wasn't just a local initiative, it was a movement that would stretch far beyond the walls of the Oak Street store. One day, Linda received an email from a customer who had recently visited the store. The message was simple but powerful. "I just wanted to thank you for creating such a welcoming space. I came in feeling a little nervous, but the kindness of the staff made me feel at home. It's rare to find a place where you're treated with respect and understanding, and I just wanted to say thank you." Linda read the email with tears in her eyes. It was small moments like this that made all the hard work worth it. She shared the message with her team, and they all took a moment to reflect on how far they had come. The journey wasn't over, but they were on the right path. Over time, Marcus and Linda had developed a respectful, though distant, friendship. They had exchanged a few messages over social media and shared occasional updates on their lives. Linda had reached out to Marcus on several occasions, letting him know that she appreciated his efforts and that his story had inspired her and her team. One afternoon, Linda received a text from Marcus asking if he could stop by the store. She agreed, excited to catch up. When Marcus arrived, he smiled and walked in confidently, but Linda could tell that something had changed in him. He no longer carried the weight of the incident like he had before. He had grown from the experience, just like she had. "I just wanted to say thank you again," Marcus said as they sat down in the staff lounge. "I never thought that one day I'd be sitting here talking to the store manager who had once called the cops on me. But here we are, and I can honestly say that I'm proud of what we've both done." Linda smiled warmly, feeling a sense of peace wash over her. "I'm proud of you, Marcus. You've turned something negative into a positive, and you've inspired so many people along the way. I think we've both learned a lot from each other." They sat in silence for a moment, reflecting on everything that had happened. Neither of them could have predicted how this journey would unfold, but in that moment, they both knew that they had made a difference one step at a time. As Marcus left the store that day, he felt a sense of closure. The pain from the past was still there, but it was no longer a burden he carried alone. It was a part of his story, but it no longer defined him. He had found his voice, and through that voice, he had inspired others. He had become a part of something much bigger than himself. And Linda, as she watched Marcus walk out the door, felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had made mistakes, but she had learned from them. She had made it her mission to ensure that the store, and herself, would always be a place of understanding, kindness, and growth. It was a long road, but it was one she was committed to walking because the change they had started was only the beginning. Both Linda and Marcus knew that their paths had crossed for a reason. They had learned that growth often came from the hardest experiences, and that through understanding, compassion, and action, they could make the world a little better, one step at a time.